Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, immigration standoff. U.S. President Barack Obama visits Texas and meets with Governor Rick Perry, but stops short of visiting the border. And while lawmakers don't agree on Obama's methods, can they agree on his plan? Also, violence escalates in the Mideast as Palestinian militants unleash their most powerful rocket attacks ever. And Israel counters with airstrikes that send the Palestinian death toll climbing. And making the grade, what will it take to train female Marines to fight alongside men in ground combat? We will have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
U.S. President Barack Obama is in Texas one day after asking Congress for nearly $4 billion to deal with the influx of unaccompanied Central American children crossing the border. The president met in Dallas with local officials and faith leaders who are concerned about the growing humanitarian crisis. President Obama is enforcing an anti-trafficking law enacted under the George W. Bush administration. Yet many congressional Republicans demand immediate deportation of the minors. The crisis is becoming political. Texas GOP Senator Ted Cruz criticized the president's agenda today during a congressional hearing.
He's visiting Democratic fat cats to collect checks. And apparently there's no time to look at the disaster, at the devastation that's being caused by his policies.
But we should never forget, these are children. They're now in our custody. It is our duty to make sure that these children are cared for properly.
This crisis puts immigration on the political center stage. Earlier, I spoke with Arise News senior political analyst James Carville, who is in New Orleans. James, it's always good to talk to you. I think I want to start with the news of the day. President Obama visited Texas today. There was a lot of conversation about his invitation to do a photo op with Governor Rick Perry, which Governor Perry turned down, but invited him to do a private meeting. And then, of course, many Republicans were calling on President Obama to visit the border, which the White House said he would not do. So my first question to you, is that a mistake? Should he have gone to see the border today?
I think it is. And not just Republicans are calling on him to do that. Democrats are also doing it, too. You know, here in the United States, we kind of expect the president to show up when there's like a bad event, a big event like this is. President Bush learned that during Hurricane Katrina. I think President Obama learned it during the BP oil spill. I'm sure there are good reasons that, you know, why they don't, but it's a kind of an expected thing. And there's a lot of Democratic moaning to go with the Republicans on this one, I think.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about this political issue because that's certainly what immigration reform is going to be now through the election cycle.
It is.
Let's start with just the general broad strokes. Which side has the most to lose by getting this wrong?
I think the Republicans do, and I think the Republicans know that. You know, a lot of them wanted, clearly a majority of the House wants, it's not a majority of the Republicans, but remember you had that special election in Virginia where the majority leader, Eric Cantor, was defeated in a Republican primary by a guy who ran pretty much on an anti-immigration platform against Cantor. Other Republican politicians saw that, and they've now said there's not going to be anything that's going to get done on this issue between now and Election Day. I think most Republicans would agree that's not the exact position they wanted to be in going to the election of 2016.
And does that put some pressure then on the leadership there, particularly on Capitol Hill, to get something done? As we all know, President Obama has asked Congress for almost $4 billion to be able to address this issue. It was met with lukewarm reception by John Boehner, but aren't they sort of under the thumb to do something?
I mean, in one sense they are, but remember, most of these Republicans are afraid of a Republican primary. It's a little bit, the dynamic is a little bit different than 2016, and their people are telling them, you know, no immigration, no anything. And, you know, I think they're going to have to appropriate some more money, but they'll probably put a bunch of ridiculous conditions on it or something like that. But this is a much tougher. All the Democrats are united. We want Democrats want immigration reform. The Republicans are more divided. And this is a very tricky issue for them. Now, separate this from these children, which is a very tricky issue for the president. And I'm sure it's not anything that he really enjoys dealing with because it's a very serious issue.
Yeah, it indeed is a very serious issue. And seeing all these pictures, the optics are very troublesome. Seeing all these young children coming across the border by themselves or sometimes with a parent. And then the impasse between those who say they're here illegally and should automatically be deported and those that say they should be treated compassionately. Where's the balance, do you think, here, James?
You know what? If I had that kind of wisdom, I wouldn't be a political consultant. I'd be something way above that. The human being side of you and the tragedy, and this is with these criminal gangs and drug laws down in Guatemala and places like that, and parents are trying to get their children out of that. And by the same token, how can you process that many people? It's a very, very difficult problem. I have great empathy for the people that are trying to solve it, and I just, it is a delicate issue, and it's a very tough issue for the United States right now.
James, drill down just a little bit. Help us all explain better. The New York Times recent poll back in May said 46% of Americans said the U.S. should welcome all immigrants, compared to just 19% who said the country can't afford to open its doors to newcomers. Well, with that in mind, with that kind of public sentiment, why can't Washington get anything done when it comes to immigration reform? Because the people that don't want it reside in Republican districts, and it's a kind of an odd system where if say in Louisiana, in the 1st District of Louisiana, if you're for immigration reform, you're going to lose a Republican primary. That means you're going to lose a general election. And the people also that are against this are very sort of emotional about it and very fired up about it. I mean, we saw Senator Marco Rubio, who was considered to be very much of a strong presidential candidate right after 2012. He came out for a version of immigration reform, and now he's almost literally being written off by everybody in the Republican Party. So it's a really tough issue for them. But the Democrats are united behind this kind of immigration reform, and as are a considerable number of Republicans, but I don't think they carry the day within their own party with that. Yeah, indeed. Some say, particularly Republicans, that the president could stop this onslaught right now by enforcing immigration laws that, quite frankly, in many cases, George W. Bush put into place, and directing Homeland Security to crack down on asylum fraud. Is this just a political soundbite, or is there some truth here to this? Well, I mean, look, everything is politics. I mean, you're coming into a congressional election here in November, early November of this year, and we're already into the presidential cycle of 2016. The Republicans have blamed President Obama for everything that you can imagine. I don't think there's a serious policy person that believes that he had anything to do with this crisis. And but I think the fair criticism of him is he should have gone down to the border and engage people and talk to them. And people like, as you use the word optics, they like the optic of the president being sort of involved in getting a report from the ground. The president would probably say, I would divert a lot of resources. I can do this thing from Washington better. But I think there's some political damage here that he's suffering as a result of this. One more thing before I let you go, James. You already mentioned this when Eric Cantor lost his primary. Many thought that, of course, immigration was gone for quite some time, and probably wouldn't be on the agenda in the new session come later on this year. Do you think if we continue to see these images, particularly of these kids flooding into the country, does that force it back onto the congressional agenda? People you got to come up with a solution to it, and no one has a real solution. And I think the public is sort of appalled that we haven't turned these children back. At the same token, I don't know how we could, the federal government can't be a parent, or, they don't have the facilities for this. It's a really, really, tragic human problem that it is, which I don't think there's a good solution. And one of the things about attacking on it is that you have to come up with a solution, and then over a long period of time, there probably isn't a good one, over a period of time, other than the fact that they got to try to help in these countries where these parents feel like their children are safe there. Right, you're right. You are right. It's tough no matter how you slice it. James Carville, thank you so much. Good to talk to you. Thank you. You bet. Always. Department of Veteran Affairs whistleblowers told their stories to lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Arise News Washington correspondent Colin Campbell has this story from the nation's capital. Hey, Colin, good to see you. Let me just ask you this right quick. The whistleblowers say that they faced, quote, a culture of retaliation. What kind of examples did they give lawmakers today?
Well, they talked about stories that it seemed that whenever they said that there was some type of discipline that was being administered, the stories would just get worse and worse. Let's take, for example, Dr. Catherine Mitchell, who talked about retaliation when she said that a series of illnesses were overlooked, such as strokes and pneumonia. She says that other workers there suffered demotions, involuntary administrative leave. Their pay would be docked. This would be a culture that would come out whenever someone complained of discrepancies with record keeping and other types of procedural problems that people were not adhering to, Debbie.
And how did the special counsel that's investigating the whistleblower claims respond to these testimonies?
Yeah, the special counsel, Carolyn Lerner, said that this was a culture that was often ignored by supervisors and that was allowed to fester. And she obviously seemed very displeased during the testimony. And this is going to create some legislation on the Hill, it looks like.
Did the lawmakers seem satisfied with the testimony, or was it just more bad news for the VA?
Definitely more bad news for the VA, but of course, with every cloud, there is a silver lining, if you could call it that. Lawmakers have talked about introducing legislation that would create a series of checks and balances. Therefore, if these discrepancies were to arise in the future, they could really be quelled before they became a bigger issue, like we've seen explode, particularly in Phoenix.
On to another topic, Colin. President Obama is celebrating a new cabinet member. Julian Castro was indeed confirmed as the Secretary of Housing and Human Development. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, by an overwhelming margin, 71-26. Castro's 39 years old. He's a three-time mayor of the city of San Antonio, Texas's second largest city. He's a Harvard graduate. He was also the keynote speaker at the 2012 Democratic National Convention, which President Obama selected him to be. He's also looked at as one of the Democratic sweethearts right now.
And, of course, we also know he has a brother, Joaquin, and they are darlings right now of the Democratic Party. Of course, that means there's always some rumors about some loftier goals. What are you hearing?
That's right. Julian has been discussed as a person who might be a future presidential candidate and also a running mate. Just to note, he is replacing Sean Donovan. Sean Donovan now goes to the White House Budget Office.
And let me just correct myself. He was confirmed as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
That's right.
Human Development will be a cabinet member, cabinet position they'll come up with later. All right, Carl. Right. Thank you so much.
All right. See you, Debbie.
See you tomorrow. Former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin became the face of the city during the Hurricane Katrina disaster. But now the disgraced former mayor is facing time behind bars. Today, a U.S. District Court judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison. Authorities arrested Nagin in January 2013 on corruption charges. They accused him of taking bribes from business people in the form of cash and gifts in exchange for helping them to get contracts with the city after the hurricane. A jury found him guilty in February on 20 counts of bribery and fraud. The court ordered him to report to federal prison on September 8th. He's also ordered to pay $82,000 in restitution. And the U.S. and Russia are in a diplomatic dispute over the arrest of a Russian citizen. American authorities accuse him of identity theft, computer hacking, and bank fraud. They apprehended the suspect in the Maldives and brought him to Washington State, where a court had indicted him. The Russians accused the U.S. of kidnapping a Russian citizen and violating a bilateral treaty on criminal matters. And in another U.S.-Russia dispute, former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden applied to have his temporary asylum in Russia extended. Snowden is currently on a one-year asylum in Russia, which expires on July 31st. Russia granted Snowden asylum last year after he released sensitive U.S. security documents, which he took without authorization. And the week-long Spanish festival, best known for the running of the bulls, is in its third day. On Wednesday, a bull gored a 32-year-old American in the left thigh after he tripped and fell. Ironically, Bill Hillman co-wrote a book called How to Survive the Running of the Bulls. Chicago man's injury is serious but not life-threatening. He'll have to reread his own book. And still to come on Arise America, female Marines preparing women for 2016 when ground combat jobs will be open to all. Also, conflict in the Middle East quickly escalating into some of the worst violence in years. And fighting over a baby, the controversy behind surrogacy, when we come back.
Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Now to a story that continues to dominate global news. The conflict between the Palestinians and Israel is intensifying. Officials in Gaza report that Israeli airstrikes have now killed 35 people and injured 150 others. At the same time, powerful rockets fired from the Palestinian territory have struck deep inside Israel, triggering alerts. Israel's defense ministers said Wednesday that the campaign against Hamas would expand. Israel may send ground troops into Gaza. Well, earlier I spoke with Arise News correspondent Laura Burden, who is in Jerusalem. Laura, the rockets from the Gaza Strip continue to fly toward Israel, and of course, Israel continues to launch airstrikes. The Iron Dome does seem to be working. Is there a worry that the militants' rockets are getting farther and farther into Israel's territory?
Well, absolutely. Now, the first thing from the Israeli forces is they're obviously proud of their Iron Dome defense system. And they said actually it's shot down 90% of all rockets that have landed in Israel so far. Now, these rockets are now stretching as far north as Haifa, which is the furthest we've seen any rockets from the Gaza Strip. As I explained last night, I actually saw some rockets over Jerusalem 7 of 8 of them were intercepted. So it seems as though there is a very high success rate, although however there are also reports that they are landing. One landed in the centre of Tel Aviv. It didn't cause any injuries. There's minimal damage, but it did start a small fire. We also had reports last night that one did actually land near the Israeli Knesset. However, the Israeli forces don't want to give away, essentially, to Hamas in Gaza precisely where they're striking so that they can essentially re-aim and get the targets more precise.
Indeed, and speaking of more precise targets, as I understand it, the militants aimed a rocket at a town, I believe the pronunciation is Dimona, where there is a nuclear reactor. Tell me what the concern is about the precision of these rockets and whether or not it seems that there is more of a strategy, if you will.
Well, there doesn't seem to be much of a strategy at the moment, considering they're relatively random coming into Israel. So one of the main concerns is actually how long range these rockets are. So one actually landed near the Dimona plant, which is a very big nuclear plant. And actually, there's been some health and safety concerns that there may have been leaks from this plant in the past. So if actually one of them does strike, that's extremely dangerous. However, there's also been many rockets landing in open spaces. So there seems to be no real precision on the targets. The issue is actually how long range these are getting and how arbitrarily it can land, possibly killing civilians.
As we understand it, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been in communication with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The State Department here says that Secretary Kerry also plans to speak with the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas within the next 24 hours. Is there any progress in the steps towards de-escalating this tension?
Well, first of all, actually, Debbie, I'll start with Mahmoud Abbas. There's been strong criticism of him from Palestinians since the outset of this war, this offensive on Gaza, because he didn't speak out against Hamas sending over rockets or neither Israel sending over rockets. However, he's now heavily condemned it, and he said he will go to international bodies and he will try and get a statement from the United Nations Security Council against the offensive, particularly from the Israelis, who he claims are trying to wage a war. Netanyahu did say to John Kerry, actually, that they're willing to take this on the long haul, so they will expand the attacks into Gaza. Spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, Jen Psaki, has warned both sides actually to show restraint and to say that the State Department is more concerned actually about the number of civilian casualties, both from the Israeli side and from Gaza. So we're still waiting to hear from news as to the conversation between John Kerry and Mahmoud Abbas. But it seems as though Mahmoud Abbas is doing some work behind the scenes, actually, and he's really trying to create stronger ties with the United Nations.
Laura Burden reporting for us from Jerusalem. Laura, thank you very much. Time now to take a look at other news capturing headlines around the globe in our Arise News World Wrap. Indonesians voted Wednesday to elect their new president in a closely watched contest between the old guard and new generation of leaders. The election pits Jakarta's 53-year-old mayor against an ex-general accused by many of committing human rights violations under the former dictatorship. Both candidates claim victory after the polls closed, but the official tally is expected on July 21st. And the United Nations and human rights activists are concerned about 41 repatriated Sri Lankans. Authorities are now charging the asylum seekers with illegally leaving Sri Lanka. Days earlier, Australia returned them in a controversial mid-sea transfer. Sri Lankan authorities say they are economic migrants, but human rights groups say the Tamil people face torture and rape in their own country. And the Syrian opposition elected a new president. The Western-backed coalition chose Hadi al-Barra following a 3-day meeting in Istanbul, Turkey. He was the chief negotiator at the Geneva peace talks earlier this year. However, the coalition has little authority over the rebel groups trying to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And that is the Arise News World Wrap. Still to come, female Marines in training, opening up ground combat jobs without lowering standards. You're watching Arise America.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
The U.S. military faces the challenge of opening combat jobs to women in January 2016 while maintaining its high physical requirements. At Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, 85 female Marines completed an infantry training course which included drills such as attacking mock enemy troops hidden in a forest. The women trained alongside men in the 8-week course, but a more ambitious test will involve 160 women in combat training from the Mojave Desert to the Sierra Nevada mountains. Training will include marching with 100-pound packs and mountain climbing. Corporal Kelsey DeSantis is a retired Marine, and during her service, she worked on the Presidential Marine One detail and was handpicked as a mixed martial arts instructor at Marine Corps Base in Quantico, and she joins us from Miami, Florida. Thank you so much for being here on Arise America, Kelsey. I do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And whenever I get this chance, I would like to also thank you for your service to our country. So now the military has to open up quite a few number of combat-ready jobs to women, and this training program, which will be a year-long process in many different types of situations and terrain, is to see whether or not women can train and be physically capable of what's necessary to fight alongside men in the Marine Corps. So I'm just going to ask you this question straight off. Do you think women can reach this level of physical readiness?
I think that question can be answered pretty simply, is that yes, there are women that are capable of doing this. However, the numbers, I don't think, rest in the majority. I think that it's select females.
Very select females. I mean, the truth is, I mean, I'm assuming you believe this, and I certainly believe it, that women certainly have the intellectual capacity, the strategic capacity, the leadership capacity to do anything that a man can do. But the physical reality is, in general, women physically are built smaller and lighter and weaker than men. And so does it present just a problem with the realities of how we're built?
I absolutely agree, is that we are built differently. I don't like the term weaker, but I think that a major difference rests in our hips, and that has to do with the amount of weight that you're carrying, and especially in a combat zone where you have, for example, these women are going to be training with 100-pound packs, and that's going to show a significant difference between the females and the males. So in my mind, there's no doubt that there's females who can hack it. However, there's a select few who can push through it and who have the body type, I would say it would be in the 10% or less range.
And beside the whole issue of whether or not a woman can hack it physically, would women want these positions? If you were still in active duty, would this be something you'd be signing up for?
I would take it into consideration just because I like to push myself. However, I would also take into consideration the mentality of a majority of the Marines. And most infantry Marines that you run into, they have a tight-knit pack, and it's kind of hard to infiltrate that unless you've been training with them for a long period of time or years. So it really all depends. It depends on the group of individuals that you're training with and what your preparation is.
That leads very naturally. I want to add someone to this conversation, and he is joining us on the phone from Connecticut, and that's retired Lance Corporal Joshua Flashman. He served as an infantryman in the Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command. Joshua, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us here on Arise America. And I want to start my question with you where Kelsey left off. Would you feel comfortable having a female serve next to you in combat who has passed the physical requirements and earned the position to be there? As a man, are you okay with a woman serving next to you in battle?
Well, it's a complicated question. We had female engagement teams, Lioness teams, with us in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they held up their weight. They held their own. But there was more health and comfort issues that they had to deal with than we did. Also, there were physical barriers that they couldn't reach that, we sometimes needed them to, and they weren't able to do it. So it's a mixed bag. Were there exemplary females with us? Absolutely. But by and large, it was a very, very, very tiny minority. What the whole argument really boils down to is it takes a year-and-a-half average to take a healthy 17 to 29-year-old male civilian and train him to kick down doors in Helmand Province and deliver some death. It takes about a year-and-a-half in the Marines to train someone to do that. The 23 weeks that Marine infantrymen go through in the pipeline, about 151 days of training, about the same as the British Royal Marines, who do not allow women, it's not enough to get someone ready to go fight. If you get a guy fresh out of infantry school showing up to the fleet, they are not going to allow him to be on the front, on the very, very front, on the point man kicking down the door. It's not going to happen. They're going to train him up. If they have to deploy without giving him more time to adapt and learn and get built up and train him the way the fleet wants him trained, they're going to keep him further back. They're not going to let him way up front.
Joshua, I understand that, but let me just jump in there and just ask you, I'm going to come at this a different way. All things being equal, the female is trained, she's able to carry the weight for the amount of time and scale the walls, and I don't even know what all the physical requirements are. But if a woman is able to meet all those requirements, does the culture that exists in the Marines today among combat men, would it allow a female, even on a psychological level, to be able to serve effectively in that combat position alongside a man? Will he accept her psychologically if she's physically capable?
I'm just gonna have to be blunt here and say no. It's more or less the answer to that is no. I mean, there may be a rare exception. You see right now with the infantry officer course, the infantry officer course more accurately reflects the demands of the infantry. Enlisted infantry course is a very entry-level thing. That's not what the demands are actually going to be of you. We expect officers to show up ready to fight. We don't expect enlisted men to show up ready to kick down doors. It's just not. We just don't have that much time and money in the budget to put guys through that much training as much as we do officers.
Kelsey, let me bring you back into this. You just heard what Joshua had to say, that he was very blunt, and I'm glad that he was, because I suspected that's what the answer was, that a lot of men, even if a woman is capable, won't accept her as a mate in the theater of war. So then what needs to be done to make this initiative to allow women in these combat positions if they want them and qualify?
I would say that it would have to go right back to what he was saying about the budget and the amount of time of training. Because, for example, the group of guys that I was with, I trained with them day in, day out. So it was a totally different element that we had that we could work together. Now, if you're not willing to do pre-workups and pre-deployments with that type of element and really spend the time and the money, into developing these co-ed units, then it's really a waste because there's so many red flags that could happen when you're overseas in a combat zone.
As I understand, of course, with these men that you trained at Quantico, they did accept you, and when you served, you were accepted. So why were you accepted? What was the special circumstance?
For me, it took a lot of proving myself. I didn't run my mouth and say that, this is what I can do and put me in this area and have me do this. I just performed. I worked alongside them. I pushed myself past barriers that I can't even put into words. So it was tremendous to be in that element and to be accepted, but it took a lot of time, and it was a lot of hard work.
That makes sense, and it seems like that concept would apply whether you're a man or a woman. We're going to have to leave the conversation right there. It's very fascinating, though. Joshua Flashman, Kelsey DeSantis, thank you to both of you. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. Number 5, Kelsey.
All right. The United States is one of the few countries that allow paid surrogacy. Consequently, pregnancies for hire is a big business that draws affluent clients. Some of the best-known cases involve celebrity couples such as Sherri Shepherd and Lamar Sally, who are going through a divorce right now. Choosing to hire a surrogate often creates complex legal and moral questions when things don't work out. States have different laws which make these cases more complicated, and some states, including New York, ban surrogacy. Others, like California, treat it like a legitimate business. So, Melissa Brisman is here. She is an attorney, and she is the mother of twin boys and one daughter whom she had through surrogacy, and she's going to help us wade through this very complicated issue. Welcome to Arise America, Melissa. Thanks so much for being here. I think I want to start with this question. Is it kind of like the wild, wild west out there in terms of the laws perhaps not catching up to the technology when it comes to surrogacy?
Well, it is in certain areas. For instance, in New York is very backward, but there are some states that are very advanced, and the law doesn't always make as much sense as it should. So, for instance, in New York, it's not that surrogacy is illegal, it's that you can't pay anybody to do it. And the woman could technically keep the baby. So the laws aren't good here, so I don't know if I would say it's the Wild West. It's just they're not positive in a state where there is so much reproductive technology.
I did a quick little Google search because I think most of us have heard of celebrities that use surrogacy. And I was astounded at how many there are. I won't go through the whole list, but it's, as Sherri Shepherd, as we already said, Joan London, John Elton, Bill and Juliana Rancic, Angela Bassett, and don't forget about Michael Jackson, Nicole Kidman. The list goes on and on amongst celebrities. But how common is it just with us regular, everyday folk?
It's more common than you would think. I've done over 2,000 gestational surrogacies in my office alone. So it actually isn't mostly for celebrities. So celebrities are just like everybody else, right? If there's a 10% infertility problem in the United States, you're going to have 10% of celebrities who are going to need some form of help. But no one wants me on TV just to talk about my surrogacy if it wasn't in connection with my business, right? So you're not going to see it every day. When I drop off my kids at school, they don't say, oh, did they come out of your womb? So it's not that people talk about it as much.
Yeah, I completely understand. So let's talk about some of these sticky areas where things break down in the process that do create these legal conundrums. Just give me a 2 or 3 that seem to be common.
There's actually not any that are common. I can give you the ones that happen in the news and in the litigation. But when you're talking, probably there's been 10, 15,000 surrogacies in the United States. There's been, for gestational surrogacies, where the woman isn't actually using her own egg, there's only been about 40 cases, and most of them are with the intended parents. So most of them are the intended parents divorcing, or one of them doesn't want the baby, or they got more than they bargained for, where it's not really what you would think. There are very few where the carrier actually wants the baby. And
I know that the laws that do govern this vary from state to state. Can you just give me in some general strokes how the laws are different across states, from New York to California to Connecticut? Just give us a few examples.
So sure, in Connecticut, you can pay a carrier, you can terminate a carrier's rights before she gives birth, as long as the embryo is not genetically related to her. So that means you could have a donor sperm, donor egg. So you could have a carrier, a gestational carrier, her husband, intended father, intended mother. No one is biologically related to that baby. Mm-hmm. In New York, not only can you not pay her, you can't get an order getting those parents on the birth certificate unless both of those parents are genetically related to the baby. So then you go to Massachusetts, In Massachusetts, you can get an order with both parents on the birth certificate, but one has to be biologically related. So I have to know the laws of every single state, and not only that, I have to know the judges and the counties. Because, for instance, in Pennsylvania, it's by county. So in one county, a judge may put two gay men on a birth certificate together by court order, whereas another judge in another county may say they have to adopt. They can't do an order.
So I would imagine in these scenarios, the strength of the success of this arrangement has to do with the contract, the agreement going in.
Well, it does have to do with the agreement, but also the proper screening and using a legitimate agency and a legitimate attorney. The cases that we see in the news are usually cases where somebody went online, placed a classified ad, found their egg donor on Craigslist, didn't screen her, didn't have testing. I haven't had any litigations involving any commercial surrogates wanting to keep the baby, and that's because we do background checks. We do home studies on all the carriers that come through our agency. We do blood tests. We check their medical records. We interview them. But on the internet, you don't do any of that.
Right. Let me just ask you quickly, does it make any difference in the law, in the legal rights of the prospective parents or the carrier genetically who's in that womb, whether or not for instance, if the carrier used their own egg in the pregnancy as opposed to a donor egg or the prospective parent's eggs? Does that make a difference?
There are two kinds of surrogacy. So one that you call gestational carrier or gestational surrogacy, depending on which state, and that's where the woman who gives birth is not related to the baby, where she generally has no legal claim to that baby.
And that's the easiest, isn't it? Isn't that the most clear cut?
That's much easier than the past, which Baby M was a traditional surrogate. So that was her egg, her baby, and in almost every state, she still would have to terminate her rights. And there are about 30, 35 cases where traditional surrogates have become attached to the baby and have wanted to exercise. And that is still the law in most states, not every, but I would say probably over 40 states in the United States, that woman is the biological and legal mother, and she would have to place that baby with the intended parents.
Such a complicated and tricky situation. I think people should hire you to help them through it.
Thank you.
Melissa Brisman, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Still to come on Arise America, can the Nigerian government follow through on the promise of, quote, good news in the ongoing search for the missing Nigerian girls? You are watching Arise America.
We're the first international television crew to visit the scene of Boko Haram's most audacious attack. We're in one of the dormitories where the insurgents came in and abducted the girls.
Okay, the time that this thing happened to us, we are in the school, so we are sleeping in the room, and we are hearing the gun.
The teachers ran away and left them alone.
There is some anxiety here as we prepare to show the Boko Haram video of the abducted girls to their families.
Now I am feeling happy because we see our friends, but we want to go and bring them for us.
For Arise News, I'm Charles Onyegolu in Borno State.
We turn now to Nigeria. Much of the global outrage over the abduction of the more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls has faded as other news and world crises have taken center stage. But the return of these girls continues to frustrate and anger many. The Islamist group Boko Haram is demanding the release of detained fighters in exchange for the girls. They stormed the school in a brazen abduction months ago, and they have continued their rampage ever since. Nigerians are looking to their government to resolve this crisis. Earlier, I spoke with Arise News correspondent Deji Badmus to get an update. He reports from Lagos, Nigeria. Deji, Nigeria's National Council of State is saying that they hope to deliver some good news very soon as it concerns those 200 schoolgirls that were kidnapped in April. What do you know about this good news, and is their release or rescue imminent?
Well, more like both, if you want to say, even though they didn't say what exactly they would be doing, whether it's going to be a rescue operation or there's going to be a negotiated settlement to this. But the good news, of course, everybody's waiting for is to see these girls, irrespective of how the girls get freed, whether they're rescued or released by Boko Haram. So that's the good news the National Council of State says Nigeria should just brace up for. But we don't know how long that is going to take.
Deji, it seems a little bit contradictory that the council would say that there's some good news coming in, because as I understand it on this side, reports are that Boko Haram has dug in. They said they will not release these girls unless some of their own members who are being held captive by Nigeria are released. Is President Goodluck Jonathan softening on his stance to negotiate with the Boko Haram?
Well, Debbie, what some people will tell you is that what President Goodluck Jonathan says in public is different from what he does in secret. There are suggestions, and I have, even from sources within the government, they are saying there is some kind of negotiation going on, even though that has not been officially confirmed. And I think for the government now, the National Council of State to come out and say Nigeria should be prepared for some good news only goes to confirm that there might be some kind of negotiation going on behind the scene, because the government too has made it clear that it does not intend to endanger the lives of these girls, and so that we may not see the troops now storming the forest to get the girls released. So it's very possible there's some kind of negotiation going on behind the scene that we do not know. But I think everything will become clearer when these girls are eventually released or rescued.
Deji, I'm going to combine two different topics in one question, so stick with me. First of all, we heard reports that 60 girls that were kidnapped a couple of weeks ago escaped late last week, I believe on Friday. Have any of those girls and women talked about their experience? Also, you have updated us that perhaps 30 of the Chibok girls have escaped. So bring us clarity on both of those scenarios.
Well, Debbie, there's no official confirmation on both stories. The story about the 60 women who escaped from Boko Haram actually happened the day before, and up till this moment, the federal government has not confirmed it. The state government, that's the Borno state government, has not confirmed it. The story actually came from a local vigilante leader who said their men on ground in a place called Damboa actually confirmed that 60 women escaped from Boko Haram, and that these women escaped when the insurgents actually went out to attack military formations, and so they got the opportunity to escape. And then the latest story we have now at the moment, still not confirmed, is that 30 of the abducted girls may have escaped from their captors. Now, that has not been confirmed, even though some people are saying there's every likelihood this actually happened. Debbie?
In our last few seconds together, Deji, I've been reading today that Boko Haram has been increasingly recruiting women to partake in their violent attacks. Can you tell us any more about that?
Well, Boko Haram has been doing that for a long time, and I think the whole issue just came to the fore not quite long ago, recently, some 4 days ago, when the military actually arrested 3 suspected Boko Haram female members who were recruiting female members for the sect. And then there was also a female suicide bomber who detonated a bomb not quite long ago in a military barracks in the northeast of the country. So Boko Haram has been doing that. A lot of people believe that, but this is actually the first time that 3 women actually would be arrested working for Boko Haram, recruiting actually for Boko Haram.
Deji Badmus reporting for us from Nigeria. Thank you, Deji. Time now to see what's making headlines across Africa today. Somalia's president fired his police and intelligence chiefs Wednesday. This follows a bold attack against his palace yesterday. African Union troops killed 3 al-Shabaab fighters and captured 1 in the attack. This was the second assault on the heavily guarded compound this year. And Ugandan troops are battling tribal fighters to end a sudden spate of violence that began days ago. Assailants armed with machetes and guns launched the attack on their ethnic rival in a long-standing feud. Officials say at least 96 people have died in 4 days of violence. As South Sudan celebrated its 3rd year of independence, the country's leaders are calling on each other to restart peace talks. 3 ceasefire agreements have failed, and the latest efforts have made little progress. Both sides blame each other, of course, for the failure. And that is the Arise News Across Africa report. Using 3D printer technology, a new prototype at MIT promises to make the simple joy of reading the morning paper accessible to millions of the blind. Matt Friedman explains.
Red, Kansas, berries with...
The classic Yellow Pages ad said, "Let your fingers do the walking." This ring-size device lets your finger do the reading.
Family could go.
While there are other character readers on the market, researchers at MIT say none are this mobile.
The finger reader is an assistive text reading device for people with visual impairments.
The finger reader connects to a laptop or mobile phone. The researchers spent 3 years working on the software and experimenting with different designs.
We have built in a few cues for the scanner, the person who's reading, to help them stay within the line.
Jerry Barrier has helped test the finger reader. He says it can help with reading anything from restaurant menus to forms at a doctor's office.
Everywhere we go, for folks who are sighted, there are things that inform us about the products that we're about to interact with. I want to be able to interact with those same products regardless of how I have to do it.
The finger reader is just a prototype now.
But we are very interested in taking this a step further. Our evaluations and user studies actually were very encouraging.
Researchers hope to produce a marketable device with an affordable price, a potentially groundbreaking solution for the more than 11 million visually impaired Americans.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, the National Institutes of Health discovered long-forgotten vials of smallpox. They appear to date from the 1950s. This news raised serious questions because smallpox is one of the deadliest diseases known to humankind. Arise News medical contributor Dr. Aletha Bankbank is here to tell us about that and other medical news. Hey, Aletha. Good to see you.
You as well.
Yeah, so of course all the big medical and government organizations, we eradicated smallpox, so we thought all of these, the stores were kept either in Atlanta or in Russia.
Exactly.
Now they find this at the NIH.
Right.
How troublesome is this?
Well, right. Finding 6 vials and it not being expected is troublesome because you wonder where are there more vials potentially. And there's always been debate whether these vials that are left purposefully in Atlanta and Russia, should those be destroyed. There's a feeling that some say they shouldn't, because what if for some reason it is out there and we do need to create a vaccine very quickly, and others that say, well, it's eradicated and we really don't want to create any issues, so let's get rid of it. So right now, you know, the CDC is doing some testing because they still don't know if it's really live or active at this point as far as the virus, but I think we'll learn a lot over the next couple of weeks. There will be a lot of conversation from multiple ends, the World Health Organization as well as here in the United States, on exactly what to do with these particular samples that were found, and then also in the future with the ones that are still in Atlanta and Russia.
And because it was eradicated so long ago, just remind folks what smallpox is.
Right, it's a pretty deadly virus, and it basically is very debilitating. Queen Elizabeth II actually died of it, but you can get pus-filled lesions all over the body, and it really just attacks the entire body.
Yeah, and
very
highly
deadly.
Contagious.
Highly contagious.
Yeah.
It wiped out communities across the world.
Indeed. Well, I hope they get their act together with this. And they've all been taking, all those vials have now been taken to the CDC in Atlanta.
They're right there now.
Hopefully that's all there is.
And that's the hope.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about a couple of other things. I want to talk about this very interesting new birth control. It seems like they're always looking for something that is more effective and more efficient and more lifestyle, if you will, integrative. This sounds very promising.
Well, it is a newer technology of delivering medicine, and MIT is actually putting this together, and it was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that approached them to think through this technology. They created it before for osteoporosis for women who were over 60 or 50 to deliver medicine so that they could help with their osteoporosis, and it found to be effective and safe. So Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came to MIT and said, can you create something for birth control? And so it's this very tiny chip. It's about the size of a Scrabble tile. It can be placed in the buttocks, arm, or underneath the abdomen, and really to release one of the most common synthetic hormones that we typically find in birth control pills. And it can last over 16 years. So the idea is that it will release a certain amount of this hormone every single day at a certain time. And then if you want to get pregnant, you can shut it off with a remote control, and it will shut off. And then you can do what you need to do to get pregnant, and then go from there.
And then turn it back on.
And then turn it back on if you choose to as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it could really be great. Are there any inherent side effects or risks that come along with it?
So that's what they're going to be working on right now. The trial that they did before, the study that they did before with the women in osteoporosis, they found to be pretty safe and effective, and the medicine was delivered in the way it was supposed to be delivered. Now the funding is for doing preclinical trials on humans and seeing what happens and seeing how safe and effective it is moving forward.
Wow, that could really be great for a lot of people. Okay, so let's talk about this last thing, and that is about obesity. We've talked about obesity so many times.
And it's not going to go away. I mean, it's really not, at this point in time, because it's increased. We see the numbers increasing, and what this particular study shows is extreme obesity. We have normal weight, we have overweight, and then you have obesity, and then there are 3 classes of that. And this is looking at the highest class. So if you're 100 pounds over what your weight should be, and the study basically shows, a very large study, that your years of life are cut off by 14 years if you are in that extreme obese category. And mainly you're passing away from cancers, especially among women. Men also have higher risk for heart disease, as well as other diabetes and diseases that we're very aware of that diabetes cause.
Yeah, and it makes absolute sense, to have that amount of weight, carrying that amount of weight. The body's just really not used to it.
It does, but it's on the rise, and so we have to figure out how to stop it.
Do we know anything? This is a little bit off the beaten path on this, but do we know a little bit about a physiological mechanism that allows someone to become, and I know it to be called morbidly obese, so morbidly obese, because it's not just a matter of eating too many potato chips. There's something very complex going on.
Right, and I think, great question. And I think we're learning a lot about what that complexity and what all the different levels. We've talked before about, is it more genetic, and, do we have this pattern that's already predisposed in us and already pre-programmed in us, and then something happens and there's a trigger? Is it the environmental factors? I think we have a lot more to learn about exactly what is happening and why this morbid obesity is happening.
Absolutely. We've got to take the best care of ourselves that we absolutely can. All right, Aletha, as always, thank you.
Absolutely.
That's going to do it for us today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow for another Arise America. Bye-bye.